It feels like an unfolding tragedy that's happened there in the English Channel, but on one level, a very predictable event as well. My colleague Nigel Farage has been saying recently, what we're seeing at the moment, in a sense, the tail end of this migratory season, if we can call it that, is people who are struggling to afford the big-ticket prices, and this is, in a sense, if I can put it in the vernacular, the sort of budget end of the market, and they're not getting the safety that they might have had, if I can put it in those terms.
Yeah, well, you get this sort of mad rush, sort of end-of-season sale, as it were, towards the end of the summer, where the weather starts to change, starts to turn. You get a rush, and obviously it's the busiest shipping lane in the world. Yeah. It is a perilous journey, but it's nowhere near as perilous as something like the Mediterranean, which is, of course, far more difficult. I think the problem here is that they got blown off course out of the Channel into the North Sea, which is, of course, a lot more perilous.
I mean, as far as we can tell, and obviously we'll get more from the Home Office as they get to the bottom precisely of what's happened, and they will not want to say definitively, they can't say definitively until they're absolutely sure, before they can start sharing the details. But we're talking about people who are at sea, we think, for the best part of over 70 hours.
Yeah, so this is what happens, obviously, when you get the bad weather and people get blown off course. It's they're going around in circles, or, you know, they're not finding land, and then, you know, as time goes by, there's more chance of an accident occurring. One of the things that makes these crossings usually a lot safer than the Mediterranean is, of course, we've got the lifeboat service and the border force picking people up actually mid-channel, sort of intercepting them and taxiing them in. You know, there's been a lot of controversy about that, whether that's the right policy, but it certainly saves a lot of lives. But fundamentally what we need to do is eliminate all of the pull factors which make people get into the boats in the first place and make those crossings, because, you know, it may be one or two people drowning over the course of tens of thousands over the years. It's a small number, but, you know, any loss of life is a tragedy. And unless we eliminate those pull factors, they're going to happen.
Benjamin, you will always get people who will point to pictures like this, and you can think back to that dreadful case of the young toddler Alan Kurdi on the Greek coast back in 2015. It can be very highly emotive, this, can't it? And you'll get some people who will say, well, look, this is why we need something more like open borders or a fairer system of allowing migrants in. The contrary argument to that, and it's one I happen to agree with, and I imagine you probably do as well, which is that actually this is the collateral damage, the tragic collateral damage of a policy that is equivocal about what it's saying to people about coming to Britain illegally. And one of the points that was made by the Abbott government in Australia was that if you make it abundantly clear to people that they will, even if they get into your country illegally, they have no future there, they'll be sent back, then ultimately what that does, by being cruel to be kind, is you are heading off those future problems where lives will be lost.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's, you know, sometimes what seems like the charitable and good and nice option is actually going to lead to more tragedies, because if you take a more lax approach, it encourages more people to make these crossings, and then there's a higher chance of these tragedies occurring. But fundamentally, you know, we can't take in the whole world. There has to be some limit on things, and no matter how generous we are, there's always going to be illegal migration, because there's always going to be an area outside what we can allow, because we just simply can't allow everyone to come. So if we don't have a rigorous and tough approach on this, if we don't disincentivise the crossings, then we will always see these tragedies.
Can I just turn to the nuts and bolts of this, which actually isn't right now what's happening in the Channel, it's happening in Parliament. You've got the Borders Bill that's going through. Give us your sense, if you would, of the direction of travel there, how that bill will really, when it becomes law, as and when it becomes law, change things. I mean, for instance, things like these jet ski interceptions that we expect to be carried out, and we have legal clauses now added to this bill that say if you are a member of the border force, and let's say you've got a rickety craft like this one, and you're stopping it mid-channel, and as looks like maybe the case here, there's a fatality that ensues from that. You need to know, as a member of the border force, that you will not be on the hook for that you will not be potentially culpable for manslaughter.
Yeah, so obviously the Borders Bill is one thing, but I think it's the main thing is the Human Rights Act and ECHR jurisdiction. While we're in the European Court of Human Rights jurisdiction, there's a lot of things we can't do, even if this bill passes. So I don't think the bill is necessarily worth the paper it's written on unless we withdraw from the Human Rights Act and ECHR. But, you know, there are all of these schemes. They come up with the jet skis and the pushing back boats, and there was one point where they discussed heat cannons to try and make it, you know, go and blow people, but all sorts of slightly farcical
processing
ideas.
In the Central African Republic.
All sorts of stuff that comes up, but really it's just a distraction, because the solution is very simple. You need to disincentivise it. You know, if people come over and they get put up in 4-star hotels, they know they're never going to be returned. You know, in the whole of 2021, there's not been a single migrant returned who's come over, and we've had almost 20,000 come. Unless we disincentivise that, you know, all of this stuff is just distraction.
And just very, very briefly, 20,000 this year, double last year. Do you expect that curve trajectory to carry on? Will we get more than 20,000 next year as things currently stand?
Yeah, absolutely. If we don't deal with the root causes, which are the pull factors, then it will continue to rise at the rate it's rising because, you know, it's great advertising. When you see people landing in Britain, being put up in 4-star hotels and having everything provided for them, that acts as advertising material for the human traffickers who can then turn around to people and say, look, it worked for them, it will work for you.
And sadly, the corollary of that, I suppose, is when you see pictures potentially of bodies being dragged from the water, as may be the case here, that may have a deterrent effect. That's the sort of converse effect, I suppose. Benjamin Loughnane, thanks for coming in, really appreciate it.